there is a single factor, just one, that when handled correctly, makes women not only desire you, but feel incapable of walking away. It has nothing to do with your appearance, nothing to do with wealth, nothing to do with charm, clever lines, or social skill. This force is far stronger and far more volatile. Because when it's activated the right way, a woman doesn't just pick you. She becomes emotionally tethered to you. She feels drawn back towards you, compelled, even when her rational mind warns her otherwise. And when it's mishandled, it doesn't spark desire at all. It creates fixation, emotional turbulence, and a situation that quickly spirals out of control. So, here's the uncomfortable question most men avoid asking themselves. Why is it that some men barely invest effort, yet women pursue them relentlessly, while others do everything right and still end up discarded? The truth isn't flattering, but once you see it, it permanently alters how you understand attraction. Attraction doesn't operate on logic, it operates on psychology. And the moment you grasp the mechanism beneath it, you stop guessing and you stop chasing. Before we go further, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. If you're here to understand women beyond surface level advice and fantasy thinking, you're exactly where you should be. Now let's talk about what women truly pursue and why most men never realize it until it's too late. Most men believe attraction is built on being wanted. They assume that if a woman wants your attention, your presence, your effort, then you're succeeding. And at first, that belief feels comforting. Being wanted feels like momentum. It feels like validation. It feels like progress. But want is fragile. A woman can want many things simultaneously. She can want affection. She can want stability. She can want excitement. She can want to feel desired. None of those wants bind her. None of them anchor her. Want is optional, and anything optional is easily replaced the moment something slightly more appealing shows up. Need operates differently. Need isn't preference. It isn't a conscious choice. Need lives beneath reason, beneath standards, beneath promises. When something becomes tied to a woman's emotional regulation, when it starts influencing how safe, calm, stimulated, or grounded she feels, she doesn't just choose it. She revolves around it. Look at how quickly wants change. She wants one lifestyle until another feels more exciting. She wants one man until someone else delivers the same feeling more efficiently. Want has no loyalty. Want serves convenience. Need doesn't behave that way. Need is rooted in emotional survival. It's what the nervous system reaches for when it craves relief, grounding, stimulation, or reassurance. And when something she needs is removed, discomfort appears, anxiety, restlessness, a sense of absence she can't ignore, and the mind will work relentlessly to remove that discomfort. This is where most men completely lose awareness. They exhaust themselves trying to be wanted, more attentive, more available, more accommodating, without realizing that every time they make themselves endlessly accessible, they reinforce a dangerous message: I am not essential. Because when you offer everything without resistance, without tension, without emotional consequence, you teach her that your presence is optional, and optional things are always the first to disappear. When attraction shifts from want to need, the entire dynamic changes. She stops evaluating you rationally. She stops comparing you to alternatives. She stops asking whether you're the best choice. Instead, she notices how she feels without you, and she doesn't like it. This distinction rewires attraction at its core. Women replace what they want. They pursue what they need. And until you understand that difference, not just intellectually, but viscerally, you'll keep confusing effort with leverage and attention with power. Men often cling to a comforting narrative. She misses me because I treated her well, because I listened, because I showed up, because I was better than the last guy. That story feels noble, and it keeps you powerless. Women don't attach to people. They attach to emotional states, psychological experiences, the way their nervous system calms down or activates around a specific man. When a woman says she misses you, she isn't missing your traits or your consistency. She isn't replaying your effort. She's reacting to the absence of a feeling she can no longer access. Calm, excitement, relief, tension, validation, whatever state you created inside her body. That's why two men can behave in opposite ways and produce obsession or indifference. One man can be attentive, consistent, emotionally open, and still easily forgotten. Another can be flawed, inconsistent, even distant, and remain unforgettable. The difference isn't morality, it's emotional dependency. Dependency forms when your presence regulates how she feels, when being with you quiets something restless inside her, or activates something she cannot generate on her own. At that point, your absence doesn't just create sadness, it creates imbalance, and imbalance demands correction. This is where logic collapses. She may understand that you're imperfect. She may even know the relationship isn't ideal. But understanding doesn't override dependency. The body exerts more force than the mind, and the body always seeks equilibrium. This is why women walk away from men they should want and chase men they can't logically explain. This is why doing everything right doesn't ensure loyalty, and this is why trying harder often accelerates loss. Here's the line most men need to hear without resistance. She doesn't miss you. She misses how she feels when she's with you. Once you grasp that, attraction stops feeling mystical. It becomes precise, not manipulative, but mechanical. You stop performing for approval and start recognizing leverage. Because the moment you become the source of an emotional state she can't easily replace, comparison ends, competition fades, and pursuit begins quietly, internally, often before she consciously understands what's happening. Every woman carries an emotional gap, not because she's damaged, not because she's weak, but because modern life quietly creates emotional shortages where they hurt the most. Pressure to perform, pressure to stay composed, pressure to be attractive, independent, agreeable, ambitious, all at once. Over time, something goes unmet, something gets ignored, and that absence becomes a void. An emotional void isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It works silently, shaping attraction, preferences, and reactions beneath awareness. And once you learn to recognize it, you begin to understand women in a way most men never do. This void isn't about what she says she wants. It's about what her nervous system is deprived of. There are four primary emotional voids that drive female attraction, not endless variations, not dozens. Four: validation, excitement, escape, challenge. These aren't personality traits, they're emotional deficits created by routine, by expectations, by social pressure, by boredom, by constant exposure to men who all feel interchangeable. When one of these voids remains unfilled long enough, it begins to pull. That pull is attraction. When a man unknowingly fills one of these gaps, he doesn't feel special. He feels confusing, hard to define, difficult to replace. She may not even label it as attraction at first, just a sense that being around him feels different, necessary, stabilizing, electrifying in a way she can't reproduce on her own. This is where power enters the equation. Because once you become the source that fills an emotional void, you stop being evaluated like other men. You're no longer measured against options. You're measured against the discomfort of losing access to that emotional relief. But this power is not neutral. Filling an emotional void creates dependence. Dependence creates attachment. And attachment, when mishandled, quietly turns into obsession. That boundary is thin, and most men don't realize they've crossed it until they're trapped inside a dynamic they no longer control. Understanding the void doesn't just explain attraction, it explains why attraction can become destructive when handled without awareness. And now that you see the structure, the real question becomes this: which void is she carrying? And how does that knowledge change everything that comes next? Validation is one of the most misunderstood forces in attraction. Most men assume that more validation automatically leads to more desire, more compliments, more reassurance, more affirmation. And initially, it appears to work. She smiles more, she engages, she leans closer. Then something subtle changes. Because validation, when it's constant, doesn't create attachment. It creates comfort. And comfort, once it becomes predictable, fades into the background. The nervous system stops responding to what it can rely on without effort. Anything that's always available eventually loses its impact. Women exist in a constant state of evaluation. Social media, careers, dating. Attention surrounds them, and when attention is everywhere, it loses value. That's why validation only becomes potent when it's selective, when it's unpredictable, when it has to be earned. This is why intentional inconsistency, applied with awareness rather than carelessness, lands far harder than nonstop praise. When she doesn't know exactly when your approval will come, her mind fills in the empty spaces. Dopamine rises, anticipation builds, her behavior begins to shift quietly, unconsciously, as she tries to re-access that feeling, not because she's trying to impress you, but because her nervous system wants the reward again. Give validation freely, and you teach her that your approval costs nothing. Remove it entirely, and you create distance without connection. But when validation appears and disappears with intention, it becomes something she begins to pursue without realizing she's pursuing it. Then there's excitement. Most women aren't bored because their lives lack activity. They're bored because their emotional environment is flat. Routine, responsibility, predictability, the same conversations, the same outcomes, the same men delivering the same energy with slightly different packaging. Excitement isn't chaos, it's contrast. A man who introduces emotional spikes, moments that feel unexpected, charged, or different, cuts through that flatness immediately. He doesn't overwhelm, he interrupts. He introduces tension where none existed, curiosity where familiarity had settled. That's why excitement becomes addictive. Not because it's loud, but because it disrupts patterns. Unpredictability sharpens attention. Teasing awakens playfulness. Mystery activates imagination. And imagination does more work than effort ever could. Once her mind begins filling emotional gaps on its own, you move out of the role of entertainer and into the role of stimulus. Here's the truth most men resist. Women don't become addicted to men. They become addicted to emotional experiences. Validation makes her feel acknowledged. Excitement makes her feel alive. When you become the source of both, without oversupplying either, you stop being one option among many. You become an emotional high she can't access on command. And once that happens, attraction no longer needs persuasion. It sustains itself. Escape is one of the most underestimated forces in attraction because it doesn't look dramatic from the outside. It looks quiet, subtle, almost unremarkable. And that's exactly why it's so powerful. Most women are constantly managing something, managing impressions, managing responsibilities, managing expectations, work, family, social pressure, appearance, performance. Even relaxation often comes with an unspoken demand to stay composed. Very few environments allow her to drop all of that. When a man becomes a place where she doesn't need to explain herself, impress anyone, or hold everything together, something shifts. Her body softens around him. Her mind slows. The internal noise fades. That relief isn't intellectual. It's physiological. And once her nervous system associates you with that state, it begins seeking access to it. Escape isn't about solving her problems. It's about temporarily removing her from them. You become the environment where she can exhale, where there's no performance, no evaluation, no pressure to maintain control. That kind of emotional relief is rare, and rarity creates value. Then there's challenge. This is the part most men misunderstand because they confuse challenge with arrogance or emotional coldness. That's not what creates attraction. What creates attraction is resistance. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most men are easy to read, easy to access, easy to win over. They over-explain, they over-invest, they rush to prove worth before any value has been established. And ease kills desire. People value what requires effort, not because they enjoy struggle, but because effort signals worth. When a man doesn't immediately bend to please, doesn't scramble for approval, doesn't reshape himself to meet expectations, he introduces friction, and friction creates focus. A man with standards, boundaries, and a life that doesn't revolve around validation becomes a challenge naturally, not by acting distant, but by being grounded. He doesn't chase approval, so his attention carries weight when it's given. Scarcity isn't absence, it's selectivity. When your time, energy, and validation aren't automatically available, they gain meaning. She can't assume access. She has to engage, lean in, invest. Escape makes her feel safe. Challenge makes her feel stimulated. Together they form a loop, relief paired with tension, comfort paired with pursuit. And once that loop is established, attraction stops being something you force. It begins pulling her in on its own. At this stage, most men make the same mistake. They try to become all four forces at once: more validating, more exciting, more comforting, more distant. And in doing so, they dilute everything. You don't need to fill every emotional void. You only need to recognize the one she's already carrying. And you don't do that by listening to what she says she wants. You do it by noticing what she complains about. Complaints are leaks. They expose shortages. If she talks constantly about how dating feels dull, how men all feel interchangeable, how nothing excites her anymore, that isn't cynicism. That's a hunger for stimulation. Her system is craving contrast. If she talks about feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, pulled in every direction, constantly needed by everyone around her, that isn't drama, that's pressure. What she needs isn't fixing, it's relief. If she fishes for reassurance, minimizes herself, or subtly seeks approval, pay attention. That's not vanity, that's a validation gap. And flooding her with praise won't close it. Selective, intentional affirmation will. If she seems unimpressed by men who chase her, bored by effort, dismissive of availability, that isn't arrogance. That's a challenge deficit. She's surrounded by access. What's missing is resistance. The key here is restraint. You don't exaggerate your role. You don't perform. You don't force behaviors that don't align with who you already are. You simply occupy the position that fits the gap. When you do that, attraction doesn't feel manufactured. It feels natural, effortless, almost accidental, because you're no longer trying to create desire. You're responding to an imbalance that already exists. And imbalance, when addressed correctly, always draws attention toward its solution. There's a line most men never notice until they've crossed it. Desire and obsession don't announce the moment one becomes the other. The shift is quiet, gradual. It happens when a woman stops wanting access to you and starts needing it to feel regulated. When you become the source of emotional balance, you hold real power, not symbolic power, not fantasy dominance, psychological power, the kind that pulls someone towards you even when they're conflicted, even when they know better. And that's where danger enters, because power amplifies what's already there. In the hands of an insecure man, it turns into manipulation. He enjoys withholding. He feeds dependency to feel important. And eventually, the dynamic collapses into resentment, instability, or emotional damage on both sides. In the hands of a grounded man, power looks different. He doesn't exploit the void. He respects it. He understands that creating attraction doesn't mean trapping someone inside it. He knows when to apply tension and when to release it, when to step forward and when to step back. Strength isn't about seeing how deeply you can hook someone. It's about knowing you don't need to. When attraction becomes obsession, desire disappears. It turns into fear of loss. And fear is never stable. It erodes trust, distorts behavior, turns connection into control. That's why the most dangerous men aren't those without influence, but those without restraint. If you choose to understand these dynamics, understand this too. Mastery isn't measured by how many people chase you. It's measured by how responsibly you handle the pull you create, because the same mechanism that makes you unforgettable can make you destructive, depending entirely on who's using it. Attraction was never about doing more. It's about positioning yourself in a woman's emotional world in a way that can't be casually replaced. When you stop trying to impress and start understanding how emotional dependency forms, you stop chasing outcomes. You start creating gravity. The one thing that changes everything is this: becoming the source of an emotional experience she cannot easily generate on her own. Not through force, not through performance, not through manipulation, but through presence, restraint, and clarity. When you understand the difference between want and need, effort stops being confused with value. When you understand emotional dependency, rejection stops feeling personal. And when you recognize emotional voids, guessing disappears and patterns emerge. This is what restores control. Not control over her, but control over yourself, your reactions, your boundaries, your availability, your standards. And paradoxically, That's what makes attraction sustainable instead of desperate. A man who doesn't beg isn't ignored. A man who doesn't chase isn't invisible. A man who understands his leverage doesn't need to prove anything. If this shifted how you see attraction, even slightly, subscribe to the channel, like the video so it reaches the men who need it, and share it with someone who's still trying harder instead of thinking deeper. And if you've ever experienced a situation where a woman couldn't let go or where you couldn't understand why she suddenly pulled away, leave a comment. Not for validation, for reflection, because the moment you stop asking, "How do I make her want me?" and start asking, "Why does she feel different when I'm gone?" you're no longer playing the same game.